Well, aloha and welcome to Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking with AARP Hawaii and Chef Daniel Swift. My name is Jackie Boland. I'm the Community Outreach Director for AARP Hawaii, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight to learn how to cook miso salmon with soba noodles. This is part of our ongoing series in which we're trying to celebrate Hawaii's diverse cuisine. Did you know that the first Japanese immigrants arrived in Hawaii in 1885 as contract laborers for the plantations? In the 1920s, they made up about 43% of Hawaii's population. Now they're at about 17% of the population, but of course that doesn't take into account all the people who classify themselves as Hapa, which is the #1 ethnic category in Hawaii is Hapa. But the Japanese have had a tremendous impact on Hawaii's culture and politics. So I think it's great that we're celebrating them tonight with learning how to cook miso salmon with soba noodles. I think you know who AARP is. We're a nonprofit membership organization with a mission, and we're hoping that this Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking series is going to help you figure out how to fit healthy food into your lifestyle. That's our goal here. And even though we are a membership organization for people 50 and older, what we do for everyone. So if we've got some teenagers on the line, you are more than welcome. These buttons are things that you should see at the bottom of your screen if you're on a PC, and possibly at the top of your screen if you are on an iPad or an iPhone or even any other smartphone. We aren't really using the chat unless you're having a technical problem. And so if you are having a technical problem, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll try to help you out during the program. We won't be using the raise hand function either because everybody's got their cameras off and we can't see you. But what we will be doing is using the Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. I'll try to ask some of those questions as we go along, but we'll for sure handle those questions at the end. I am going to do a prize drawing, 3 prize drawings. I'll contact you in the chat. And I warn you, it takes over a week for you to get your prize, but it's a cool prize. We're giving away some of Dan's special uala leaf seasonings that he's put together. So if you get a text from me in the chat telling you you've won, all I really need from you is a text back saying, yes, I want the prize and here's my email, and I'll contact you for your address. So Chef Daniel Swift is the Workforce Development Coordinator at Windward Community College. He's an amazing host and chef on this program. And at this point, I'd just like to turn the program over to Chef Daniel Swift.
Does it work? Okay. Are we there? Can you hear me, Jackie? Are you good? Can you hear me?
Maybe I'm.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking. This week with our focus on Japanese cuisine, I selected a really simple dish, making miso salmon with soba noodles. So this is an item that can be served hot or cold, either way. You could even have cold noodles with the hot salmon on top. It's sort of up to you. We'll go through the process and I'll give you a little pointers here and there as we work our way through. You should have received the recipe. If you haven't, you can always email me at danswift@hawaii.edu, and I'm happy to share with you the recipes if you didn't get them in advance. Very, very simple tonight, but very tasty. So I've got a little bit different setup. I've got my water boiling already, and this is salted water for the noodles. And then I've got the toaster oven that I'm using for the salmon. You could, of course, use your large regular oven at home, but for out here, it's just easier to set up the small toaster oven. So if you look at the ingredients that we have for the first part, I've got the mirin, the sake, the miso paste, just a red miso paste. I got this brand here, All Natural Miso. I just picked that up the other day Safeway. So you can find this in most of your produce sections at the supermarket. And then a piece of salmon. And I know we used salmon previously when we did cooking methods. I think we did salmon 7 ways. It doesn't have to be salmon if this isn't your favorite fish. You want to try this with another fish, feel free to do so. I just like salmon and I like it for this particular dish. So very, very simple. And the vegetable oil that I'm using here is avocado oil. So feel free to ask questions as we go along, and I'll jump right into the mixing of this here. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the miso paste in the bottom of the bowl. And then I've got my Mirin and my sake I'm going to add. This is very simple. And then the vegetable. Let me switch this over as I do the mixing so I can show you the techniques there.
Dan, I have a few questions already. Can I throw them at you?
Yeah, of course. Go right ahead.
So somebody bought crown noodles, fresh yakisoba, 9 ounce. Do they need to be boiled or can they be used as is?
If they're fresh, they should be cooked already. What I would do is taste one. They do make both types, but if you taste it and break the noodle open, you should be able to tell whether it's been cooked. More than likely, most all of those noodles are cooked, but you can find them raw, fresh. It's not as common as like pasta, but it does happen. So I would just taste it and check it. And I would always rinse those off as well. Maybe soak them in a little bit of warm water, drain them, and then chill them or serve them hot, whichever technique you want to use.
And then Lori wants to know, can you substitute something for the sake?
Yeah, absolutely. You can even eliminate the sake if you want to. I just put it in there. I like the flavor. We're using Mirin, which is sake-based season with a little bit of sugar. It depends on the brand that you're getting, but whatever you want to put in there is fine. You don't have to put anything with alcohol. As a matter of fact, you could just take a good quality miso and mix it up with a little bit of water, and that would work. What you're looking for is sort of a paste, sort of a thick marinade here. And I'm hoping you can see this a little bit where it coats the salmon very, very nicely. So what we're doing here is marinating, and I have listed up front here sort of our lesson for this evening. We're talking about marinating and marinade. So a marinade is a noun. So that is what we basically made here. We made a marinade. We used the sake, the Mirin, the miso, and a little bit of oil to create our marinade. And then when you marinate, that's the verb. That's the act of doing what we're doing here, which is basically letting the meat item, it doesn't have to be meat, it could be tofu or vegetable, soak in the marinade that we made to absorb those flavors.
And Norman would like to know where he can get a salmon fillet that looks as nice as what you have.
I picked this up at Safeway, believe it or not. Well, I shouldn't say that. In case you're from Safeway, you always have great fresh fish. Most of it's flown in, obviously, bone in. And the thing that I would point out with this one, it is nice and fresh and good. It does have the skin on. I prefer the skin on. You may not. If you don't, what I would do is cook it skin side up, and then the skin will peel right off. What it also has here is the belly. So you can see how the salmon really slopes down, and you've got this thick belly portion here. Because I don't want that to overcook, what I'm going to do is tuck it under, which is very simple. I'm going to do skin side up, so I'm going to flip this over and tuck that thicker portion just underneath, so it doesn't cook quite as quickly as it would if it were just thin and flat, sticking out straight. Okay. And I did oil this slightly, the aluminum foil. This can get a little toasty as you get going, so I recommend you a little bit of oil on a piece of foil so that it doesn't burn onto the pan and create a mess for you to clean up later. And then this I can go ahead and put right into the toaster oven.
So if you didn't have a toaster oven, would you be using a broiler or would you be baking this?
I would bake it. If you broil something, it tends to be a little on the high side, so you're dealing with temperatures close to 500 degrees, so it could burn very easily. I think I've set this recipe at about 385. This particular oven does not have a fan. It's just a small, regular, conventional oven, toaster oven. So it will cook a little slower than a convection, but if you go with broil, you're probably more than likely going to burn your fish. So stick with bake, stick at a temperature between 350 and 400, and you should be fine.
Thank you. And a couple folks are wondering, can they use white miso instead of red miso?
Absolutely. I probably would have purchased that if they had it at the store. I do like that flavor. And miso, as you know, is just a fermented soy paste. Usually has some salt in it, the koji, sometimes barley. This one is double fermented, it says. So there's quite a wide range out there and a wide range of flavors. So they used to make the tubes, the small squeeze tubes. I was looking for that. I couldn't find it, so I had to get the tub, which is about a pound, 13 and a half ounces. So a little bit more than I wanted to get, but it will last in the refrigerator, or just incorporate it into more of the dishes that you make. And you'll find that it goes really well with a lot of different things. And then I'm going to move over to the soba noodles, which is the buckwheat noodle. You'll find them as much like so min. Here's one brand here. So min noodle is the same thing, but it's not made with buckwheat. It's just a regular white flour. You could use that as well. And then they always have these nice little wraps. So theoretically, what you do is you hold the wrap, you shake it, it drops, and as it unravels, it should fall in and spin and separates all of the noodles. Now, I tried this last week. We were doing a dish in the kitchen, and it didn't work, and the whole pack fell in, and it automatically fused almost instantly. So I'm hoping that it will work as we do that. And
Lena on Facebook is asking, can she find gluten-free soba noodles, or are they always wheat?
That's a good question. You may be able to. There's more and more gluten-free products coming out all the time. If not, you could find a gluten-free noodle that would work just fine for this dish. So substitutions are perfectly fine. It works great.
Okay, and Norman wants to know, what's mirin?
Mirin is sake with seasoning. You can pick it up at the supermarket. Usually has a little bit of sugar. I was reading the label on this particular brand. It has corn syrup in it, but there's a lot of different ones. This is by Kikkoman, probably the more popular one, but it's a seasoned flavored sake with some sweetness to it. And then I did add a little bit of salt to this water. Anytime you're cooking noodles or pasta, I recommend that you season the water about the level that you'd find in the ocean when you swim. So you want to be able to taste the salt.
Thank you.
And then one other thing here, I'll switch if I could to the overhead view. You want to make sure that you have a good amount of water. So especially with buckwheat noodles, they tend to be a little starchy, or more starchy than a lot of your noodles. So you don't want to go on the light side with the water. You want to make sure that there's plenty of room in there for the starch to be absorbed, and yet it still remains thin like water. If there's not enough water in there, what you end up with is this like a soupy, bubbling boil, kind of like when rice is almost finished, and it can make cooking it a lot more difficult. And those only take a couple minutes. While they're cooking, I'll pull out the ones that are already done. And these are already chilled as well. So we cook them in advance. We toss them in a little bit of oil just so they wouldn't stick, and put them in the refrigerator so they're nice and chilled. And then the ingredients that go with this, very, very simple. And this can be any vegetable. Matter of fact, last night I picked up some broccoli, some baby carrots. As a matter of fact, I also grabbed some watercress that I'm going to use on the plate tonight. But for the recipe, I had just listed peppers, edamame, some green onion. The dressing that we're using, you can pick up already made, or you can create your own. There's so many great, even locally made dressings that you can pick up that I highly recommend. This is the Kikkoman one that's made for soba, so it's probably more on the traditional side. Today I'm going to be using a dressing that we make here in house with olena and shoyu chili pepper oil that I added some vinegar to create our dressing. And then I'm just adding these ingredients together. Hopefully the bowl's big enough. And the noodles will take just a couple minutes. They should be ready at about the time that we're ready to plate this. Now I'm just gently stirring this. On the recipe, I have you prepping this in advance, putting it in the fridge with all the ingredients, but not necessarily mixing it yet. We're kind of limited on time, so I'm going to just go ahead and do the mixing. And that gets the ingredients going, and then I can shake up the dressing that we made and add that.
Dan, what is mirin?
I'm sorry?
What is mirin?
Mirin, it's that blend of sake with sugar and seasoning. So yeah, it's like a sweet sake basically.
And then a couple people are asking questions about oil. Why are you using coconut oil? Could you use olive oil?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I put on the recipe vegetable oil because I tend to use a lot of avocado oil, but you can use any oil you want. Traditionally, you would probably see sesame oil used in this particular dish. It could be the toasted dark sesame, which gives you a lot more flavor, or just the neutral white sesame oil. Kind of up to you to decide, but any oil would work. So the initial oil that we started with was to keep the noodles from sticking. And then the rest of the oil is the oil that would come in the dressing. And I would also, yeah, go ahead.
So I have several more questions. Do you want me to wait for those?
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that this is more of a thin shoyu based dressing, which is traditional, what goes with soba, but this could be a creamy style dressing as well. It depends on what your tastes are. So they make a really popular miso salad dressing. You may see it in the supermarket in a green bottle. I forgot it in my fridge at home. I meant to bring it in, but it would be really, really nice with that, but it would give it more of a creamy style dressing. With a rich salmon, I would rather have the thinner acidic one, but if you're doing a leaner fish, it would be perfect to put a nice creamy dressing.
You're making me hungry. So I have several questions about marinating. So does marinating the fish longer give the salmon more intense flavor? Is there too long of marinating time for fish?
You can actually, yeah, you can over marinate probably anything, but I would say that the most common item that you would have trouble with would be something that you marinated teriyaki style, because the soy sauce will really penetrate. It tends to be a little bit on the saltier side unless you dilute it with a little water, which is what I do generally with the shoyu dressing for teriyaki. But you know, you want long enough. This wasn't long enough for me. I think I put 30 minutes on the recipe to overnight, and because this is a mild marinade, it won't overpower it. If you had something that had a higher level of acidity in it, you'd have to be really careful with fish because you don't want the acidity in the marinade to then cook the protein that you're marinating. So it just depends. But you want to go usually at least 30 minutes up to, you know, overnight. But rarely would you marinate anything longer than about 12 hours.
Thank you. And then Maxine's saying there was a lot of marinade. Can I use it, save it, and use it again?
Yeah, I mean, I do that a lot, but what I do is cook it, right? So if we have that nice bowl there, I'd put it in a saute pan, I'd warm it up because you're gonna have some raw fish juices in there. Bring it to a boil. You might see some foam start, or it depends on how much juice went into it. And then you can chill it down and remix it and use it again, absolutely. And these noodles are ready. I'm just gonna pour them here.
And one of our participants is answering about the gluten-free soba noodles. She's saying that a lot of the health food stores carry them, and so does Amazon.
Oh, there you go. Awesome. So
Thank
these
you.
are, if I were to serve this dish hot, it would be ready to go. I could then throw in my vegetables. The noodles would probably be hot enough to warm up the vegetables if they were at room temperature. If they were coming out of the refrigerator, I'd probably want to warm them up a little bit in advance. So if you're doing this at home, you could put a little bit of ice in here, run them under cool water, and then put them in the bowl with a little oil to chill in the refrigerator while you do your salmon prep. But keep in mind, this can be either hot or cold. And I'm going to toss this. You'll see these will start sticking just in a few minutes as they cool. So I do want to hit them with a little bit of oil. And just a little toss will work. So normally I'd be tasting this as well to make sure that it was where I needed it. But I don't want to talk with my mouth full. So I'll set this aside and we'll work with the one that we have here. We can come back and take a look at our salmon, kind of see where we're at with that. It smells great. Yeah, and you can see the caramelization. Let me switch this over. Taking place on the pan where the marinade was, and the skin is starting to dry out, and it'll probably start crisping up. We've got a few more minutes. So with this particular oven, I probably would have ramped it up to 400 just because it doesn't have the fan. But if you're working at home and you have a fan and you want your skin to be crispy, that's the way to do it.
So one of the participants is asking if you can do this in a air fryer, which is the way I like to do it myself. But what are your thoughts about air fryers?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's basically what we're doing. So if you use an air fryer, which is a well-circulated convection oven, basically, that would work perfect. So temperature, you might have to fluctuate with. I've never used one. The concept is the same. It's a dry heat method. Basically roasting or baking is what it does. And once you understand the limitations or the temperature ranges of your particular oven, you'd be fine to use that. The other thing you can do with these is if you have the little micro torch that they use for creme brulee and things, if you pull this salmon out, the fish is done the way you want to do a last minute crisping up of the skin or a blistering of the skin, a torch works really good for that.
Well, the cool thing about the air fryer is you can do it with the skin down and it still gets crispy, which is a great feature.
Yeah, absolutely. And this
have,
particular, I was going to say, Jackie, this particular one I could do skin side down as well. I would just want to make sure that I have the oil there so it doesn't stick. And they also do make, and I haven't used it, but I've seen the commercials for it, the Teflon coated aluminum foil. So it's like a non-stick aluminum foil. I'm excited to try it. I haven't bought any yet, but that would probably work really well for something like that.
That's exciting. You should tell us how that works. Sunny wants to know, can this marinade be used on butterfish?
Oh, absolutely. It would be ideal for butterfish. So
and then for marinating the butterfish, Wendell was wondering, if you were doing butterfish, would you marinate it overnight?
I would. I mean, if you have time, it depends on the size. It depends on how much you enjoy the flavor of miso. This could also be something that you use as a base. So if you were to take the marinade that we made earlier and just reduce the quantity or the amount of liquid that you added, just make it so that it would be a bit more like a barbecue sauce. This could simply be basted on as you're cooking your fish. It wouldn't necessarily need to be marinated. So there's a lot of variations that you can work with here, but yeah, absolutely butterfish would be ideal.
Well, it's interesting. So Lou was saying that she pokes holes in the thicker part of the fish for the marinade. Do you do that, or would you recommend doing that?
You can do that. There probably is an impact on that. This was a pretty thick piece of salmon. If you got a larger king salmon or something, fillet that was thicker, I would probably just control the penetration of the marinade by the way I cut my fish. So it's just a little bit easier, because if you start poking holes, the fish can fall apart, at least in the restaurant when you're transferring it to a plate or something. You're better off just going on a bias and cutting a thinner piece of fish, so you don't have to deal with that.
Salmon, the texture of the salmon is so satisfying that you don't really want to ruin it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm
Um,
going to just, while we take
Yep.
questions, I'm going to add a little bit of this to the
Ooh, that's so
platter I
pretty.
have here. And what I did was grab, like I said, that watercress, which I love, and then I'll put some of the noodles in the center. They're already dressed, and then the vegetables will usually stick to the bottom of the bowl, and you can just slide those out on top. And I'll put a little bit here on the side. So this salmon smells like it's ready. I have one earlier that I had done. I'm going to switch cameras really quick just to show you guys this. And this I did at a higher temperature with this oven, and it was starting to brown too much. So I put a piece of foil over it. So you can certainly do that if you're baking your fish and you see it, the skin start to get a little darker than you want. Just take a piece of foil, lay it on top. It will protect it while it continues to cook. And then we've got this nice caramelization on the skin. It's a little crispy. This one you can see started to crisp up. Hopefully you can. The reflection is kind of interfering with that. And like I said, this is the fish is warm. This one's room temperature, but it could easily be chilled as well. I'll remove it from here. And it can go on top. If you're doing family style, I always make the plates a little bit larger here, so it's easier to see. So this wouldn't be one serving, obviously. This would be for 4. And then as I take this salmon off, I'm going to flip it over so we can see both variations of it. And then I have some sesame seeds I could sprinkle on top. And those can also go inside the salad. I have it down as a garnish, but you could certainly use it inside the salad. This is just a regular toasted sesame seed here. And then I have black sesame seeds if you wanted to use a little bit of those. And sometimes mixed together, it adds a nice difference in the color. And I even have here, I didn't use it today, but they make the wasabi sesame seeds. I think we'd used it in a previous class. These are just seasoned lightly with wasabi powder, and they're really tasty. The challenge that we noticed with them is that they'll tend to bleed the green. So if you were to mix this with a soba noodle or something that's whiter, you'll see that color sort of leach out, the green color. But if you like the wasabi flavor, this is a great product to use.
So we still have quite a few questions.
Yep.
All right, let's just start at the top here. Can you repeat what you said we could substitute for sake?
Yeah, you could basically use any liquid. The goal of the sake here is one, to impart flavor, but also to thin the paste, the miso paste. So you could start with water and then work your way through the flavor profiles that you're thinking of. So I wouldn't use vinegar, but you could utilize any white wine, beer. If you don't want the alcohol in there, you could use a little vegetable stock. If you're doing fish and you have fish stock, you could certainly use that. But any somewhat neutral liquid that's going to dilute and thin the miso would work great.
Thank you. Wendell wants to know, could you make this in a microwave?
That's a great question. These days, I think you can make almost anything in a microwave. They even have the little brownie kits that you mix and put into a plastic thing and microwave cakes. What I would say is make sure that you go to the lower setting, right? Not defrost, but usually they have power ranges. So somewhere in the middle, and then just go in bursts. So maybe 1 minute at a time. and check it. And keep in mind that you won't get the caramelization because microwaves work on moisture. So it's really more of a way of moist heat warming of things, but you could then come back and torch it if you wanted to. But yeah, absolutely. I think a microwave sometimes over or underrated in terms of the things that you can do with them today. So I'm not against using a microwave at all. You would just have to experiment a little bit.
And Melvin is asking, did you add oil to the boiling water when you made the soba?
I did not. That's a great question. A lot of people do. A lot of recipes and books that you run across will talk to you about doing that. I never add oil. Number one, it's expensive, or it depends on the oil you're using. And then it goes down the drain. The role of the oil, generally, if you see it listed in a recipe, is stated to prevent the noodles from sticking. But if you have enough water in there, if you're stirring it, it's boiling rapidly, they're not going to stick. The sticking issue comes once you've strained them. And once you just have the pasta alone, whether it's been rinsed or not, it's still going to stick together over time as it sits. So that's where the little bit of oil comes in when I work. And you mix that up, keeps it from sticking, and then also imparts a little bit of flavor. So, if you're using a nice avocado oil or something, you don't want to pour that in and then have it go down the drain.
And Deborah's asking, are the red peppers blanched or raw?
Raw is what I would say. We had some peppers donated, and these are the nice little, you can probably find them in a can, like the sweet chili, or there's a term for these. Like a chili pepper. It's the ones that you see a lot of times in an Italian market where they'll have a piece of prosciutto wrapped cheese stuffed inside. You may find those at Whole Foods. These are probably, well, if they still have at Whole Foods, the section where you can, the olive bar type of thing. And these work great. So if you're using a regular red pepper straight out, I would do it raw. But if you don't like the flavor, you can switch to another pepper. Those nice small little red ones that come in the pack of yellow, orange, and red, they're sort of sweet. Those work great for something like this as well. So yeah, it's sort of up to you and your taste.
And Linda would like to know, was the edamame frozen, or do you have to cook it?
I bought this frozen and shelled already. So you do not have to cook it. This one was cooked. So you can, get the ones in the husk and shell them yourself. But to me, I just love buying the ones that are already done. They work great for dishes like this. They work great hot. They're good cold. They make a great hummus. Substitute this for chickpeas next time you make hummus at home. And it makes a great version of hummus. Turns out really, really nice and a really pretty color as well. So yeah, you don't have to do that. I think this was Simplot. I put the bag in the kitchen, but yeah, this was bought frozen.
Thank you. And Lynn says that normally miso is too salty for her. Do you have a brand you could recommend that maybe has less salt in it?
Well, they all tend to be a little salty. You may find one today has lower sodium. If you look, I haven't looked for one yet, so I couldn't say for sure. But what I would tell you is that you can control the salt level with the items that you're adding to it. I worked at a restaurant in Seattle years ago for a chef that had a butterfish recipe, a miso butterfish, that he actually had used yogurt in there. So if you were to cut this equal parts with non-sweetened, non-fat yogurt and made a paste and soaked that your butterfish or your salmon in there as well, that would cut your sodium by half and maintain the flavor, because the yogurt is relatively neutral. So actually that little bit of acidity might even be really nice for you if you like that flavor. But yeah, I haven't seen a salt or a low sodium one out there, but I'll bet that it does exist.
And for the fish, would you use sugar if mirin is unavailable?
You can just taste your marinade, see what you think. Once you get the sake in there, you might even, if you wanted the sweetness, add a little bit of honey. That's got a nice texture to it as well. Or you could eliminate the sugar altogether if you're trying to stay away from carbohydrates or refined sugars. So that's kind of up to you in terms of taste. But I would always think of, like, when you're making a marinade, think of think of it like a soup. If you watched our show last week, we did Portuguese bean soup and went over the components of a soup. Same thing with a marinade. You have components. There's usually an oil in there. There's usually salt and or seasonings and spices. Oftentimes an acid in there, which is good. And even on this dish, I always talk about at the end finishing with an acid. Now we've got the sodium, obviously, from the miso, but I want a little bit of acid. I would at least put some wedges on the platter to be served so that people can come back and squeeze some lemon juice onto it as they need it. Yeah.
Many people are complimenting you on how beautiful the dish is.
Thank you. It does look nice. So, and that's the thing that I would try to encourage everyone to do. I mean, we'll always talk about a technique of some sort. Today it's marinade, making marinades and marinating items. But when you approach, the execution of the recipe, feel free to get creative with the fish. Feel free to get creative with the vegetables. I have broccoli here. That's what I'm going to make tomorrow for dinner. So my wife and I will have salmon and probably use the same type of dish for that. So, just think of it as a guide and see what's fresh and get inspired. As a matter of fact, I grabbed this at the store last night. This is it's got a sprouted brown rice. It's a 8-grain mix for rice that my wife and I use. We pick it up at Safeway. And I believe we used this for a porridge earlier in our first series. And this is just a great item that would be, instead of the soba noodles, it would be a great base, simple in the rice cooker. Use that as a base for this miso glazed salmon. It would be perfect.
It's interesting you say that, because we need to give a shout out to Maxine. She says she made the salmon with you. It looks perfect. She can't wait to eat it. And she also made the ginger rice that you made in the first class. So she's combining those two. Yep. Perfect. Good job, Maxine.
Great. Yeah. And I think with the first class was where we did the steamer, we used the rice cooker and we put vegetables and stuff on top. That would work ideal for this. If you were to do that, cook your rice, open it up, drop your salmon in there, close it and let it set until the salmon is cooked. That would work great. The thick salmon like this, you might want to drop in just 5 minutes before the rice is done so that it cooks all the way through. Otherwise, you might have to wait for 30, 35 minutes. But yeah, it's great to know that folks are picking up on some of the techniques and able to execute the dishes. We try to keep them simple, fast, healthy, and ono. That's the goal.
Well, and speaking of the fish, Norman is asking if he buys a half slab of salmon, would he cook it whole, or should he try to cut it into pieces to cook it all at the same time? How would you deal with a whole half of a fish?
Yeah, good job, Norman. If you like cutting it yourself at home, you can do that. You could also ask your meat cutter, usually. Let them know you want 8-ounce portions or whatever, and they'll do the cutting for you. But if you're getting it whole and doing the cutting at home, the thing you need to keep in mind is sort of what we pointed out here, that the head of the fish is going to be about this thick, and then it's going to taper off to the tail, which is about 1/4 as thick. So those pieces need to be separated. So you're cutting those portions from the tail all the way up, and roughly the same size. But you just want to make sure that when you're cooking them, that you're using half the time for the thinner fillets, and that'll progressively get bigger. So you just have to sort of watch your salmon. And I've said before, I prefer mine medium rare, medium, not cooked all the way through, because salmon can tend to get dry. But if it happened to get dry with this one, I'd probably just crumble it up and mix it with the soba noodles in the salad, which is another option. But if you're getting the whole side and preparing the meal, I probably wouldn't do it whole, because you want that tail to be perfectly cooked, just like you want the head to be perfectly cooked.
Thank you. Are you about to tip that up and show it to us?
Oh, I can. Yeah, sure. I can do the overhead if you'd rather.
Nice. And while you're switching cameras, Donna Hashimoto check the chat. You won one of the prizes, but we just need you to respond in the chat with your email. Oh, that does look nice.
Yeah. So it's very simple. And I put a garnish on here I got from Jackie Malley's garden. Thank you, Jackie. Had a little bit of basil. You can always come back with a little fresh herb. So here's some fresh Thai basil. And then this is her dill. She had some really nice dill, and dill and salmon are a natural pairing. Even with the miso, it adds a great flavor, as would the basil. So you could chop herbs of choice and put them into the marinade, or you could put them into the salad itself. Either one would work great. But you're going to get here, even with this one, you're going to get a lot of the pepperiness of the watercress, which is local, will go really well with the miso. So if you highlight the flavor of the ingredients that you're working with, you don't end up having to add a lot of salt or additional items. You highlight the flavor of the products that you're working with.
Nice. I want to congratulate Joe D and Mariko Ike for responding and winning the door prizes. Joe won a prize yesterday on the caregiver webinar, so it's a good week for Joe.
All right.
We do have a question. Is the Uwala Leaf Cafe open to buy the seasonings, or is there somewhere else to get them?
We will be when in the spring. We're not open right now. The campus is closed for general public coming, just for students, faculty, and staff. So we're hoping come January, we'll be able to open up again, but all of that will be determined by the system level.
Thanks. And Sophie's saying she doesn't like bell peppers. Could she use cherry tomatoes instead?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I had some in the back and I thought about that, but they're so similar in shape and color, I did not add them. You can add anything you want. Like my wife does not like bell peppers, so I wouldn't put the bell peppers in there. She doesn't mind red, but the green bell peppers, absolutely not. What I would recommend is like that bag of the little assorted ones. They're only a few dollars, maybe $4, and you get a pretty good sized bag with the little red, yellow, and orange ones. And the flavor on them leans a little bit more to the sweet side, less to that strong bell peppery flavor. So that's one thing you could try, but you can add anything you want to this. Would be good.
And not apparently knowing that I'm from the Pacific Northwest is asking, do you have a preference for wild caught salmon versus farm raised salmon? I'm going to mute myself so I don't put out my passionate response on that. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I'm sure your answer would be fresh wild salmon. I worked as a chef in Alaska in the summer of '98, I guess it was, and of course I would prefer fresh salmon, wild caught salmon. It's just usually a cost factor. I don't have any problem with a lot of the farm raised stuff. There's issues in terms of coloring agents and things like that that are going on in the production of those. But if you have an option to purchase wild caught salmon, I would go that route. But this was $12, $12.99 a pound, I believe, which is already on the high end. I try to keep these items affordable that we're producing here, so I wouldn't go any more expensive than that. To get a fresh line caught salmon during salmon season would probably cost you a little bit more than that.
And Costco has those great wild caught salmon frozen fillets that you can get. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm okay with farm raised if I pretend that it's not salmon, if I think it's a different food, it's fine. Anonymous is asking, how would a silicone mat work?
Yeah, they would work fine, perfectly fine. So yeah, if you have the silicone mat, usually they're the squares, they'd be on a sheet pan, works fine. The only thing that I would be careful of is that most of you would know that like the salmon has a pretty strong smell and the oils permeate. So if you are using that sheet regularly to make cookies or other things, and then you put salmon on it, make sure you clean it really well. They will hold up to the dishwasher, so you can put them in the dishwasher and run them through there, but just check it before you put some shortbread cookies down and you bake them and they smell like salmon, it might, it might not be the best thing for some folks. But
Have one
absolutely.
that's just for salmon.
Yeah.
So several people are asking about the recipe and the ounces of the fish. So you should have received the recipe in your confirmation emails. You can click on the link. But Dan, do you want to repeat the ounces on the salmon and kind of the recipe for the oil that you used on the soba?
Yeah, most of the recipes that we do, we try to set them up for 4 servings. And I tend to target, you know, depending on the item, between 5 and 7 ounces of protein. So for this one, I had 1.5 pounds of salmon, and that's for 4 people, cut into 4 portions. I had 3 tablespoons of miso paste, a 1/4 cup each of mirin and sake, and then a tablespoon of vegetable oil. And that was in the marinade. And then for the soba, I had 8 ounces of noodles, because they'll expand in size, obviously absorbing moisture. So you'll end up with about probably, you know, 4 to 5 ounces per person in the portion size. 2 cups of the shelled edamame, 1.5 cups of peppers, or 1 large one would work, 1 big one like that. Oops. And then green onions, I have 1/4 cup. But if you like more, you can always cut more if you wish. Sesame seeds, garnish or to taste if you put them inside. And then for the dressing, I used, if I look at this, I used about 1/4 cup, a little bit more than 1/4 cup of this particular dressing. What I would do is just add about 1/4 cup, mix it, taste it. If you want to add more, you can add more. Just be careful dumping lots in there, because once it's in, you cannot take it out, but you can always add more.
Thank you. So we're running out of time. Lots of people think it looks delicious. So why don't we end on this question? Irene is asking, what is the best kind of sake for cooking?
Oh, that's a good question. The one that's on sale. I got this one. There were a couple brands, and some that were, oh, sorry, the oven's ready. There were a couple brands, and this particular one was like $12, and it was on sale for $7.99, I think, at Safeway. And then there was another brand that was similar, that was $7.99 as well, but it was regularly priced like $10. So I got the best valued one. So it just depends. For a marinade, not so much, but you can certainly chill it or warm it and serve it with the dish that you're doing. And then the price goes up from there. There was a really neat, Morimoto makes a sake. It's a neat little round jar, kind of shorter side, that I thought about getting, but I got more value when I picked this one out. So if it's dry or sweet, I mean, it doesn't really matter for what we're doing with the marinade per se, but if you're going to drink it afterwards, I would just go with the ones that you like.
Thank you. That's great to know, because it can get really expensive. So before we go, well, first of all, thanks, Dan, as always, for such a great program. I just wanted to call people's attention to this concert. I know a lot of you participated in our concert last week with Taimane, and this will be our final concert of the year with Henry Capono, and we'll be celebrating veterans, military, and their families. You do not have to be a veteran or a military or the family of one of those folks to participate. Join us in honoring them for their service. It's a free event. We'll be giving away 5 grocery store gift cards for $100 each during that program, so you might want to tune in. And then for our Caregiver Wednesday webinars this upcoming week, we have at 4 p.m. Medicare for Caregivers. If you're not on Medicare and you're helping an older adult, you can really give them better guidance or even help make decisions for them or with them if you know how Medicare works. It is the retiree health insurance for most Americans. So if you don't know about Medicare, you might want to check that out. And then if you're on a neighbor island, our county offices on aging will be talking about community resources for older adults and caregivers, and also COVID-19 resources. So you might want to check one of those out. You can register with that URL up above. So I'm going to leave that on for just a few minutes so you can check it out. And with that, we just thank you all for coming. We're looking forward to seeing you again next week. If you came in late, people are asking, where can I see the video? The best place to see it is on Facebook at the AARP Hawaii Facebook page. So just go to the search, put in AARP Hawaii, and then when you get to our page, click on videos. I am recording it, or I think I recorded it, but it's not always consistent. But the Facebook Live is definitely consistent. Okay, thank you so much, and thanks, Dan.
You're welcome. Thank you.